Terry Bouton was there with his wife as they were observers, not participants. He's an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and is joining us now. So, Terry, I think what's very interesting about you is that, you know, not only were you there as an observer on Wednesday, but you've attended other demonstrations in the nation's capital. You talk about the March for Science and other demonstrations. So you have the ability to sort of give us a on-the-ground level comparison. So what you did is you went to Twitter and you sort of listed 5 big takeaways of observations you made about the crowd, about the way they interacted with law enforcement. Give us a sense of what your big takeaways were from that event on Wednesday.
Well, I mean, one of the big takeaways was that when you look at like a lot of the coverage is focused on, you know, like the hardcore white supremacists and the people in the, you know, heavily militarized Proud Boys, the guy in the crazy Viking helmet. And what I wanted to emphasize was that it wasn't just that. It was there was a lot of, you know, it was your neighbors. It was a lot of normal looking folk. It wasn't just sort of, you know, poor white working class, whatever. That there were a number of, you know, these are people who could take off a Wednesday and fly to, you know, many of them fly to D.C. And so the crowd outside was a lot of just sort of regular people, and some of these people got involved and were in. They hadn't come prepared for, you know, they weren't wearing body armor. Like one of the people I saw first person I saw who had been who was gassed trying to wipe the pepper spray out of his eyes was a guy in a Duke University like alumni sweater. You know, nicely dressed. And there were a lot of people kind of like that around. And so I want to, which is the thing that I think needs to be emphasized, that this is just like, it's your aunt, it's your uncle, it's your, you know, it's a lot of, you know, your brother-in-law. It's a lot of average people who have been radicalized.
The second takeaway you mentioned is the lack of security. You believe, this is your opinion, that the Capitol was purposefully left understaffed. I mean, what makes you say that? And I guess the question that, given that you're a professor of history, you know, Anna Marie and I were talking in the last segment about the definition of what we saw take place on Wednesday. Generally, if there is some kind of conspiracy to carry out an insurrection, to carry out a coup, there's some coordination so that if you are going to overrun the Capitol, you know what to do once you get there. If you are going to try and keep the current president of the United States in office by rejecting the electoral votes, you take some of that, you take some action. You seize either the media or the military is on your side. We didn't really see any of that. So the notion that the Capitol will be understaffed, which lends some credence to what Congressman James Clyburn said on our air earlier this morning, that he believes that there may have been an inside job here. What is the evidence that you're going on?
Well, look, I've been to, since you know, the Women's March in January 2017, you know, my wife and I have been to half a dozen big protests and events in D.C. And there's a strong police presence in each of them. And often a strong federal presence in each of them. And there's all kinds of precautions taken, like, you know, a list of things that you can't bring, like sticks and the rest of it. And one of the reasons we even went, knowing that there had been threats of violence for this, like we knew there were threats of violence against this at this event. And one of the reasons we went was, you know, it's Fortress D.C. There's cameras everywhere. There's federal presence everywhere. If anything happens, they're going to, you know, swarm the Capitol. And that just didn't happen. We arrived after they had breached the Capitol building and on the scene. And there was only a fairly skeleton crew of Capitol Police there. And they were clearly overwhelmed. And the only reinforcements we saw arrive in the couple hours that we were there were other Capitol Police. There was an FBI SWAT team that came in, but this was 8 people who came in specifically to get Ashley Babbitt out of the Capitol. And once they had extracted her, like they were accompanying the EMTs that were going in, once they extracted her, they left, and there was no other federal presence. We saw there was some Metro police that I think were accompanying ambulances, and but it was Capitol Police by themselves for hours. That's one of the we had trouble getting cell service there for anything like data wise for Twitter or the internet, and so we didn't have a clear sense of how bad things were. When we heard that the Capitol had been breached, my thought was like, oh, this is people doing a sit-in, because otherwise there would be, troops swarming the place, federal officers swarming, and there was just nothing, and nothing that was happening on the outside as far as law enforcement went gave any indication of the severity of the violence and destruction and the threat going on inside. And I don't know how that happens, given that the vice president and both houses of Congress are in session.
Terry, one of the other things that I found upsetting about your tweets is I had an acquaintance go down there who did a lot of sort of live streaming himself, and he described the people at the Capitol building as a bunch of knuckleheads and insisted that the vast majority of people were peaceful protesters. And I read your account of what you witnessed, and I think what I found particularly disturbing is the casual acceptance of white supremacy. You were listening to a lot of the conversations, and you described how the fact that a lot of these people are kind of sort of middle-class working folks, right? They could afford to take a day off of work and that sort of thing, and yet they were able to sort of ignore some blatant white supremacists. They were able to casually accept the attacking of police officers while still wearing a Blue Lives Matter button or T-shirt. I'm sort of curious about your own kind of feelings as you overheard some of the conversations. In one tweet, you described, what you saw as bloodlust.
Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. Like it was what was chilling for me was the casual way in which people were describing, like, taking the Capitol or hanging Pelosi or Pence or other kinds of actions. Like, this is just the beginning. This is just starting. There was a lot of pride in what had happened. And I don't know if people there had a clear sense of just how bad the violence and destruction had gotten inside the Capitol. But there was a lot of cheering on and really just people like sitting around having normal discussions about extreme violent acts. And I don't know how much of that is hyperbole. Like, I don't know how much of that is tough talk versus something that they're willing to take action on. Like, my sense was, there was a noose and even a guillotine out front. And I don't know, these aren't the people who are going to storm Congress and bring people out and lop off heads, but they're going to cheer it on. I didn't have any doubt about that there was a real culture and celebration of violence. Because one of the things I think you have to understand is a lot of these people are absolutely convinced that this was a revolution, that they were taking part in a revolution. Like, we were hesitant to film anything, but one of the reasons we filmed was because everybody was filming. Because they wanted to document this moment that they imagined was going to be a big revolution, and there was all kinds of conspiracy theories everywhere. Like, as we walked in, there was another protest at the Senate Park where, a guy's on the microphone in front of a crowd talking about the crimes against humanity by Anthony Fauci. And so they're convinced that the election was stolen. They're convinced, however much they buy into the whole QAnon thing, whatever. But they all referred to each other as patriots. We were greeted as patriots a number of times. That even if the conspiracy theories don't quite match up and are contradictory in places, that doesn't seem to matter, right? I mean, if you can buy into the idea of there's a broad, Hillary Clinton's running a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor in D.C., what's left? Like, that's if you can buy that, there's an awful lot you're willing to buy. And they've listened to lies and the stories that have changed. From Trump and a lot of these social media and right-wing websites. I just don't. I don't know. I mean, they want to believe and are willing to believe in a lot of things that aren't true, and so
it's hard.
What that motivates people to do is frightening.
Yeah, they are stoked. They have been stoked for the last 4 years by everybody from the President of the United States to politicians who looked at this as an opportunity to position themselves politically for their futures, and the right-wing media sphere, which keeps them, hyped up and angry. And I found it remarkable to see, police officers being attacked by this crowd holding a Blue Lives Matter flag. And that is sort of, that juxtaposition of those two images, or to see a Confederate battle flag inside the halls of Congress. And I've been in situations in other countries where you're reporting and there is a massive crowd of people behind you, thousands of people that seem for the most part to be pretty peaceful. But as they listen to what you're saying, it can happen in an instant. Within 15 seconds, the mood of the crowd can change. And people who just came to watch, people who were just standing on the sidelines, all of a sudden start to galvanize to one focal point, and you're in serious danger if you're somebody who's not with the crowd or perceived to be against the crowd. And I think that's what we saw happening on that day. And we, as you noted, there was no participation or guidance for what was going on. So as a professor of history, you've specialized in revolutions. You've covered this and, done, research on revolutions in the past. Do you think, just based on what we've seen in the last couple of years, you mentioned the Pizzagate debacle, that this is sort of the beginning, we're in the middle, or is this a way to, as one politician, Arnold Schwarzenegger, politician turned actor, said, if we can recognize this for what it is, we can actually try and stop it from escalating?
I think that's true. I think we're in the middle. We're not at the beginning. We're not at the end. I think we're clearly in the middle, and it's time to take this seriously, and to say this is beyond the pale, that this is not something we can accept. Because, quite frankly, my sense of things there was that these people were not expecting consequences.
Right. That's why they filmed themselves.
Right. They were not expecting consequences, and they were expecting. We got a real strong sense and heard a lot. There was an expectation that the Capitol Police were going to join them. Law enforcement was going to join them. We heard people were shouting out to the police, like, "We have your back now. You need to have ours," right? Because I carried a thin blue line flag that somehow entitles us to your allegiance. And if you don't give us your allegiance, then you're a traitor. Like, if you do your job as a law enforcement person and uphold the duties that you're supposed to uphold, that's a betrayal of some larger, loyalty that they're supposed to have to, this group. I don't quite understand it. But they were shouting traitor, like after Ashley Babbitt was wheeled out, and we were right there when it happened. I was 15 feet away from where she was wheeled out, and the crowd turned on the police and even the FBI, and they were shouting traitors, and there was a guy up on the top of the Capitol steps, who was ripping up the thin blue line flag and throwing it out over the crowd, and the crowd started to chant, "F the police." It didn't last long. It wasn't like ringing, but it was being chanted. And it was weird because just before the FBI went in, there were a bunch of these, weekend warrior guys who were in their own makeshift camo and battle gear, who were coming up to the FBI guys and fanboying them. Like, they're coming up and they're seeing these guys in military attire who have the real stuff, and they're kind of oohing and eyeing over them. And then these guys go in to retrieve the body, and now they're traitors. So those kinds of totally unrealistic expectations. And I know there's video of Capitol Police taking selfies on the rest of it, but most of the Capitol Police we saw were just trying to do their jobs. They were terrified and horrified by what was going on. When we came in,
Terry,
we arrived first. Yeah. Go ahead.
You know, because you're a professor of history and you have a particular expertise in revolution, I just kind of want to ask you kind of a compare and contrast question. Vlad and I have talked about, you know, people have said this was an attempted coup. You see some of the people who took part calling it a revolution. And I, you know, I said to Vlad the other day, maybe we texted Vlad, you know, typically when there's an attempted coup, it's actually over, you know, an overreaching dictator or injustice or bloodshed, and people are driven into the streets to make a change. Here we have people sort of driven into the streets by online rumors and clearly, you know, the assertion that an election there was fraud in an election that we have proved over and over and over again is definitely not the case. In fact, the election was more secure than it has ever been before. I'm wondering, just in the revolutions that you have looked at, how much does rumor, lies, misinformation factor in? And when you see the landscape that we're dealing with now, when you see how easy it is to share information, lies, and rumors, are you concerned about our future?
I'm concerned certainly about political discourse and what's happened and the radicalizing effect of social media and the internet on people. I mean, clearly that's happened. And yes, rumors and lies and whatever, misinformation have been part of revolutions before, more so like the rise of authoritarian leaders than like bona fide, like, you know, bottom up kinds of revolutions. But I think from a historical perspective, it seems to me that what we're dealing with is broader and bigger than internet conspiracies and the rest of it, and that is what this is based a lot on emotion and feeling, and these are a lot of white people who feel like they're somehow being left behind or losing, or their country is being taken away from them. And if we look, right, I mean, one could think about this as a big backlash against a lot of the, you know, the rise of the 60s and 70s social movements and the ways in which those social movements have taken root in American culture and the ways that they're pushing for a more authentic kind of equality, you know, for Black people and Latinos and LGBT people. And my sense is that this is this is part of a big backlash against a culture that is rapidly changing, that is far more tolerant of difference. In which white people are demographically heading towards a minority of the country, and even corporate America has changed with the times. Look at the commercials that have been on in the Trump era, where you've got two gay fathers and interracial couples, and it's far more diverse in even the kind of commercials we see on TV. And my sense is that these people are threatened by this. That this is not the world that they grew up in. And being racist now has consequences to it, in that people will video you and they'll put you on the web and that you will be identified, and there's a good chance you're going to lose your job. And I think that white people in America have had so few consequences to the kind of bigotry that they've expressed, whether that's bigotry against non-whites or bigotry against LGBT people or any kinds of people who are different, immigrant groups, whatever, and that now there are more consequences than there used to be, and I think that's part of what's going on here. I mean, it's a complicated mix of forces. It's not a monocausal thing. Yeah.
No, Terry, it's an excellent point. And at the end of the day, the point that you were just making, in the wake of this insurrection, it's been mind-blowing for me to see some of these people fly back home to their hometowns and go to work like it's a normal Monday or a normal Thursday, without expecting any repercussions. And then when they are arrested, then you hear, well, I didn't realize it was going to be as bad as it was. I didn't mean to do it. But just the notion that you would take part in something like this and then go home and then, or, there were reports that, and video evidence showing some of these folks out after the events of that day back at the hotel lobby bar, enjoying their chicken fingers and having a beer. I mean, I just thought that was sort of mind-blowing to me.
I was going to say, we walked through Union Station, like to Union Station back, and we passed a number of hotels, and there's like boutique-y, like the George and other places, and the lobbies were filled with people, and these were like upper middle class people who were drinking wine, looking at their phones, and like it's a celebration. They were proud of what had happened, and by that time, if they're getting cell phone, Wi-Fi service in the hotel, they've seen the storming of the Capitol, they've seen some of the violence, and yet they're continuing to. I mean, they're celebrating it. They're proud of it.
Yeah,
and I think
they bought into
the bubble. It's the bubble.
Right. They bought into this big lie that at the heart of President Trump's claim, which was amplified by his media and his party, was that the election was stolen. That is the big lie, and we all have to reconcile ourselves as a nation with that. Terry, thank you so much. This was a really fascinating discussion. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.